Tuned into Recovery TV, the voice of hope, with your host, John J. Tassoni Jr. Discussions and information on addiction and mental health issues. Now, here's John and today's guest.
Welcome to another edition of Recovery TV. I'm your host, John Tassoni. Pick up some Narcan, put it in your purse, leave it in your car, take it in the house at night because the heat makes it an issue. Well, my guest today is Mr. Patrick Crowley, the Secretary-Treasurer of the Rhode Island AFL-CIO, and we're going to talk about what the unions are doing during this opioid crisis. So welcome, Patrick, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, John, and thank you for the hard work that you put in to help this community.
Thank you. So tell us a little bit about the unions. I know they've had a lot of problems with substances, alcohol, suicides. What is the unions doing to combat this issue?
So, quite a bit, actually. Let me take a step back and just set the table for you and your viewers. So the Rhode Island AFL-CIO is the umbrella organization for all of the labor movement in Rhode Island. We have about 80,000 working women and men that are part of our 275 different affiliates. We represent everyone from construction workers to state employees, public school teachers, firefighters, police officers, really a wide range. Any job that you think you can do in Rhode Island, they're part of our movement. And as you can imagine, with that many people under our umbrella, a lot of them are facing the circumstances that too many Rhode Islanders are facing. Right. They're suffering from addiction. They're suffering from suicidal ideology.
That was easy for you to say.
Easy for me to say. So, really, for the last several years, a lot of our affiliated unions are trying to combat this in ways not just within their union halls, but at the workplace. So one of our satellite organizations is a group that's called the Occupational and Environmental Health Center of Rhode Island. It's based in Providence, and it services all of the unions in the state. And every quarter we've been having meetings at one of the building trades union halls, whether it's the plumbers hall, the electricians hall, and trying to get the word out about what resources are out there for local labor union leaders so they can help their members in distress.
You know, because I've been involved in that, I helped try to get some guests for the unions to combat, whether it's mental health issues, whether it's opioid issues, whether it's alcohol issues, suicidal issues. You know, what the unions always get a bad name, you know, as someone who's been in the union for many, many years. But to do what your organization is doing to help folks get the help that they need, it's to your credit.
Well,
it's to your credit, you know, and because a lot of businesses just, you know, they say, all right, listen, you haven't come in for 3 days, I don't know what the problem is, you're fired.
Right.
But here's the problem with the unions, and not so much as a problem, but there's a lot of money that's spent on training. So I've been told up to maybe a couple $100,000 per union member, depending on what union you're in, with training dollars to help you do the job that you need to do. Now, if you lose 2 or 3 of those members, that's a shot across the bow, whether it's from the construction companies, the unions itself, or the members. It's a big hit. And for what you guys are doing to bring it to the forefront, have people on the ground trying to help their brothers and sisters, that's the way to go.
Yeah, thank you, John. It really is. I mean, I've seen a real cultural shift in especially our building and construction trade unions, where I think it's fair to say a lot of these problems are centered right now, though it is spread across the entire labor community, where you've seen local union leaders like Michael Sabatoni, Dan Bianco, Paul Alvarez, Joe Walsh, Dave Langlays, et cetera, guys that are really focused on the well-being of the men and women that are members of their union. And you're right, they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars making sure that their work skills are meeting 21st century standards.
Right.
But what they've noticed over the last several years is that the things that don't necessarily get talked about in their trade classrooms, you know, the problems with addictions, the problems with mental health, how that can spiral out of control. You know, so they've worked assiduously to make sure that that's incorporated now into their training programs. because of the hard work that they're doing. I think it's making a difference. And I'll just give you one example. So earlier this year in 2024, we had a session over at the Plumbers Union Hall in East Providence, and we were lucky enough to have as some of our guest speakers rank and file members of the building trades who had gone through their own addiction and recovery journey, and are now becoming peer coaches. And the stories that these people were talking about their own suffering through addiction, and then finding that light at the end of the tunnel and working through their union to make sure that their other brothers and sisters would find the tools that they could have at their disposal to get through this struggle and survive, and then eventually learn how to thrive again. And a perfect example of this is Marty Walsh, the former Secretary of Labor, former Mayor of Boston, card-carrying members of the Laborers Union. He went through this himself, and it was through his union that he finally got the help that he needed to enter into long-term recovery. And I think when you see guys like that, and I emphasize guys, it was easy enough to just kind of bury that and toughen it up and suck it up. And I think that mentality is finally starting to dissipate so that you can be the toughest guy in the world. But if you're suffering from drug and alcohol abuse, it doesn't matter how strong physically you are. It really is that mental health component of it that the unions are really trying to do the best job they can.
Yeah, and the other thing too, I've heard from a lot, because we do training. We've had 4 or 5 of the building trades join our organization at the Leadership Council to get more information, to bring it to their members, to make sure that they're well informed what type of issues that we can cover. Whether it's mental health, whether it's substance use or alcohol or suicide, they're there because they're there to listen, they're there to learn, and they pass on the information. But you brought up a very good point. This peer-to-peer, folks, the best idea. I don't know whose idea it was, but it's the best idea, because if I have a problem, I don't want to talk to Patrick Crowley. I want to talk to the guy that I'm working with on the ground. Say, listen, Pat, I got a problem. You think you can help me, steer me in the right direction? And then Pat picks up the phone, whether he calls me or calls somebody else, and it's easy and it's seamless. There's no red tape.
And you're talking to someone that you trust.
Right.
I mean, oftentimes people find themselves, they're embarrassed that they've let their life get to this point. So they don't want to talk to a wife or a husband. They don't want to talk to a parent. They certainly don't want to talk to a supervisor or a job, a foreman. They want to talk to someone who's not going to get them into trouble because they're seeking the help that they really, really need access to.
You bring up another good point, Patrick, about the bosses.
Yeah.
The bosses need to learn about this problem so they can help steer their workers in the right direction instead of cutting bait and letting them go.
Right.
Because, people say, well, I don't want that type of person working in my industry.
You're exactly right, John, and it's why I think the labor movement is uniquely positioned to help tackle this crisis, because our job is to represent the worker, and sometimes that puts us into conflict with the boss, with the employer. It doesn't need to be the case, but we want to make sure that our members' rights are protected, but we also want to make sure that they survive.
All right, Patrick, we're going to take a quick break. You're watching Recovery TV, and I'm your host, John Tassoni, here with Patrick Crowley from the Rhode Island AFL-CIO, and we'll be back after these messages.
Now, back to Recovery TV with your host, John J. Tassoni Jr. Recovery TV is made possible by our supporting sponsors and our title sponsor, AdCare. Now, here's John and today's guest.
Welcome back to Recovery TV, and I'm your host, John Tassoni. Mr. Patrick Crowley, Secretary-Treasurer, Rhode Island AFL-CIO, is my guest. Thank you, Patrick, for joining us today, and thank you for the work that you're doing with this opioid crisis, mental health crisis. We got crises all over the place.
We do. So thank you.
So thank you for taking the ball and running with it. A lot of people talk to me about municipalities. Do they belong to the unions? Do they not belong to the unions? And my answer is mostly all.
Correct.
If not all. Boy, you also represent the people at the Department of Health, correct?
Correct.
All right. What are they doing to help you out?
So it's a great question, John, because I think this is an example of how the solidarity within the labor movement is how we're trying to address this crisis. So, Many of the workers at the Department of Health are union members. There's AFSCME Council 94 represents some members, the United Nurses and Allied Professionals, NAGE, which is National Association of Government Employees, but also the professional staff at DOH are represented by the National Education Association, Rhode Island. And those are the folks that really have the areas of expertise at a master's and PhD level regarding addiction issues, regarding mental health. And one of the things that we've been doing, mostly through the Occupational and Environmental Health Center of Rhode Island, is linking up those union members using their skill sets about how to treat and adapt to these issues and making sure that their information is getting out into the broader labor community. We had an event a couple of months ago as well where we had 3 or 4 different professionals from Department of Health, all of whom were union members, and making sure that the building trades leaders knew how to use the Narcan, you know, how to physically open the package and apply it.
Right.
You know, and I think that's one of these little things that you don't think about. Because remember, you find someone who's going through an overdose situation. As a human being, if you're not familiar with that, you're going to be panicked. You're going to be worried that you're doing the wrong thing. You know, am I going to make it worse? How am I going to help this person?
Right.
And just being able to have that hands-on type of training where someone knows they go to the emergency box or they grab the box that's in their toolbox and how to apply it in a safe and effective way, in getting over the panic and the concern and knowing that yes, you can do that. And that's how the labor movement is helping all of its various component parts out.
Yeah, I know. And when Narcan first came out, there was a lot of questions. You know,
Right.
Oh my God, if I give somebody a shot up the nose, am I going to kill them? You know, am I going to make things worse? But
Right.
it really doesn't affect them if they're not in an opioid crisis.
Right.
You know, just a little bit of a, you know, smell of the nose, and then you're good to go. But you know, I got to tell you though, the more and more individuals that we train on the ground, whether it's union or non-union folks, the better off we'll be. You know, when I first went into the General Assembly, we were number 4 in the country with substance use and mental health. We slid all the way down to 48.
Wow.
Why we did that? Somebody took their eye off the ball.
Yeah.
And they didn't pay attention. Education and treatment is a winner all day long. At least you're giving the people the information they need to make an intelligent decision. And again, we're not going to help everybody, but the vast majority of people that have education and treatment will be helped.
I hope so. I mean, that's why many of our collective bargaining agreements, our union contracts, have, you know, a level of health insurance and health care that our members can take advantage of. Most of those have some kind of employee assistance program that's
Right.
built into it. And I know when I was a day-to-day union rep, someone worked out in the field talking with people in classrooms, in state buildings, at municipalities, and just going over the various benefits that they have. The EAP program was always one that got a lot of attention. And because it was the union that was talking about it, it wasn't their boss, it wasn't their supervisor, they felt like they could come to me and say, listen, I've got a loved one. Maybe it's my wife, maybe it's my son, maybe it's, you know, someone else in the family. How do I find out more about this stuff? And we were able to point them in the right direction. And that's why I think the work that you're doing is so important, because you're a trusted source, you're doing a lot of great work in the community, and people know that they can go to you and find out the information they need without feeling this societal pressure that someone's going to get in trouble, or, you know, they don't want to feel as if they're less important as a human being, because they really are.
Right. You know, and get back to like the labor, the building trades. A lot of money spent on training, but there's not a lot of money spent with the people in the office. But still, when you lose a worker, it's a blow to the community.
Yeah.
It's a blow to the department, whether it's the health department, whether it's DOT, whether it's any place, especially now when you can't get people to work. When you lose an individual, that's a big hit to the department.
It really is, and that's why I'm hopeful that as we in the labor movement start to highlight this as an issue that we're working on, that more and more of our employer partners will start to see it just in those terms, John. You know, we lose a brother or a sister. You know, we've invested in that person through their training. first, as a human, it's a big loss. Second, it's a financial loss. But to the employers that we contract with, it should be seen in that view as well. They're losing an employee. That's someone who's part of their work family. But more importantly, in some levels, if you're thinking about it just from the bottom line, if you're going to spend all of this time and effort and resources to find that highly skilled worker, you want to make sure that that worker is protected.
Right.
Now, we've done a good job over the years making sure that their retirements are protected, their day-to-day health care is protected, their on-the-job safety is protected. Now we've got to shift gears a little bit and put as much, if not more, emphasis on their mental health and their addiction protection.
It's got to be a partnership.
It really
between
does.
the companies and the unions, companies and whether it's non-union, it's got to be a partnership. If you don't have a partnership, you're going to lose people left and right.
Yes.
If you don't have training, if you don't have education, you're going to lose people.
Yeah,
Again, you're not going to save everybody.
true. But at
But-
the same time, and it's a training that is accessible to anyone. You don't need to be a public health epidemiologist with a master's degree from Tufts Medical Center
Right.
that's working at the Department of Health. You can be a truck driver. You can be someone like me that came out of a Coca-Cola factory and learn the skills that are necessary. And not just in the physical application, but the things to look for,
Right.
the signs, in a way that you want to be, so you can say to someone, hey, John, I noticed that things don't seem to be working out right. You want to talk about it? Or if you don't, why don't you give me a call over the weekend? That
Right.
kind of work, I think, is so important.
Yeah, the communication. We're going to take another quick break. You're watching Recovery TV, and I'm your host, John Tassoni. We're here with Patrick Crowley, Secretary Treasurer of the Rhode Island AFL-CIO. We'll be back after these messages.
Now, back to Recovery TV with your host, John J. Tassoni Jr. Recovery TV is made possible by our supporting sponsors and our title sponsor, AdCare. Now, here's John and today's guest.
Welcome back to Recovery TV, and I'm your host, John Tassoni. Patrick Crowley's in the house, the Rhode Island Secretary Treasurer for the Rhode Island AFL-CIO. Patrick, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for the work that you're doing with the union members on this opioid crisis, alcohol crisis, suicide crisis, and the list goes on. So
Thank you, John.
Thank you for what you're doing. I want to talk a little bit about women in the workplace. We spoke a lot about union members, building trades, but there's women in the building trades.
Absolutely.
What is the percentage now of, if you know it, how many women to men in the building trades?
So it's growing rapidly. It's gone from single digits to double digits in terms of percentage of representation. But you can see across the entire building trades and really across the whole labor movement, we're seeing a lot more women leaders stepping up, a lot more people from other underrepresented communities, more African American people, more Latino people. So I think you're seeing a real demographic shift in the entire labor movement.
A mix, and you also the moms. They're moms.
Yeah.
Moms with alcohol, substance issues, and they're able to obviously grasp what everybody else is grasping. I
Sure.
think, and that is very important.
Well, I think it's indicative of the idea that this type of illness doesn't discriminate.
Correct.
And that's what I think is going to be helpfully part of the conversation.
Right. And that's a very, very good point. Patrick, I want to thank you for coming on today. I want to wish you luck in your new role.
Thank you.
A lot more headaches, a lot more extra strength Tylenol, but I know you do a great job. Well,
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for joining us today. Next week, my guest will be Mike English. And Mike is with the Nicholas Bonamano Fentanyl Awareness Foundation. He's going to be joining me next week. So thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next week.